Good morning, everybody. I'm switched on today. I thought last week was a bit of a
fail.
Bit of a fail in the beginning, but we started well today. At least I was here and I had my brain in gear. So let's get started. So during the week, and this is something that happens to me every single time I start a project. I start a project, we get through a whole lot of it, and then I get excited about what it's going to look like when it's finished, and I go ahead and finish it, and then we struggle with what's going to happen during the shows, which means I've got to ad-lib a little bit anyway. And I've done exactly that again. If you have a look at our show, our cabinet, this is what our little cabinet looks like at the moment. I've finished all the boxes for this one anyway. We have another one that we're doing as well, but it's not going to have 6 drawers in it or 5 drawers in it. But it's exactly the same size and it has all the same configuration and so on. So it's going to be pretty much the same, except for the fact that it's just going to have platforms on it and a couple of drawers. This one will have all the drawers and various bits and pieces that Pam wants to put on it. Now, over the period of the week, what we've also done is Pam's dressed up these and put a coat of Chinese wood oil on them. So she's done all the cane in the back of it. I might just spin that around so you can see the back of it. You can see it's still got little cane parts to it. It adds a little bit of a feature to it. There's no point in pulling it off and getting rid of it. I know the baskets were all expanded and not in very good condition, but this is still in good condition, so it's just a matter of cleaning it off and putting a coat of finish on it. And so that's what we've done with it. And so that's what it actually looks like. When you push all those in, they all come into the right size. They all fit quite nicely and they slide quite well on the new platforms. So what we have to do is I have to show you how in the top here we've got our little breech pull, and what I hadn't done so far is shown you how to fit the little purple heart lifter. We've got all this sorted. This one still needs a little bit more work in there. So we went through that a couple of programs ago, so you'll need to go back to the program and have a look and see how we've done that. But putting a lifter in is a little bit of work as well. So what I have here is I have another one of the drawers. This is going to go in the other unit. Now all my parts are exactly the same size as those ones there, so there's no difference in them, and same timber and everything. So what I've done is cut all the dovetails. I've cut all the trenches for the base, which is there. So today what we're going to do is we're going to fit this together. I've got to cut the base. We'll talk about that when we come to do it. And I've also got to fit the bridge pull in the top. Now this is just a piece of purple heart that's been cut to size, and I've also rounded over the end of it. Alright, so, and I'll show you why I've done that when we get that sorted. So the first thing to do is to get a trench in here. Now you're going to need a piece of scrap material, and the scrap material that I've got is actually the piece of material that I used to do my joints test. It's exactly the same size as the box frame. So the router bit I'm using to cut the trench is a TSRW8. It's again another Carver tool thing. Disregard the X in here. This is just a TSRW8. The X means extra long. It's not extra long, it's just the packet that I had, and it's the only one I had available at the time. So that's a 1/4 inch end cut, and so it'll be quite easy to cut it. What you need to do is you need to make sure that this piece of material is exactly the same diameter as, or the same width as the cutting end of the router bit. Right? So that just makes it a little bit more simple, a bit easier to cut. The other thing that you have to take into consideration, that both of them have to fit into the thickness of here with a little bit of support on both sides. Right? So that's another consideration that you need to take in, need to think about. So our first thing to do is to fit the router bit. Now, the height of this, I only want 10 millimeters of this in here. This is about 12 mil. It's a bit wider than I need. That way I can dress it down to the right size. I only want this up at 10 mil, but I don't want to cut all of 10 mil out at the same time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set one of my LARK tools at 5 mil. And that will be my first cut. So I'll adjust my height to 5 mil. For those of you who haven't seen the LARK tool, they are available. We have them, but also you can get them direct from Derek.lark himself. There's a link below. Okay, now the next thing I need to do is I need to get my distance from here to here. Now, in these ones here, my distance from the edge of the cutout to here is 40 millimeters. Alright, so what I need to do is just make sure I get my 40 millimeters from the inside of there to the inside of there to make it look even. Now, even if you have this offset a tiny little bit, the 40 millimeters is still going to make it look even. Right, now so set my ruler. I've got my height set. Now I just need to set my distance. So 40 millimeters from there. From there. I need to get a little square. Okay, so I'm going to cut down the middle of here. Okay. And my piece of material will fit into that. And as you can see, there's a little bit of material on either side. There's plenty there for support, so it's not as if it's a problem. Right, now what I need to do is I need to measure. I'll just put a marker on the outside here. It's just on my corner. So it's going to go from there to there. And what I need is a fence. So the fence that I have is one of the ones that we made in our program at the beginning of the year. And this is where it gets a little complicated for Pam to be videoing, just filming. So she's going to be doing a merry little dance around things.
Light on my feet.
Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do before I set the distances is I want to do a test cut. Now my test cut is going to be this bit. And so what I want to do is I just want to do a little test cut down the middle of here. Just turn it around.
Yeah.
Just check that I've got it right.
Nice and dark so we can see it.
You can see that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what I'm going to do here is just set that to the middle of the router bit. Like so. And it's important that you do that test. I had a cramp here somewhere. Those tests for this particular exercise are extremely important, so it's a good idea just to make sure that you have everything set up. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to slide along this one. I've got to go from right to left, so Pam's going to have to do a little dance again to make sure we're showing it. Okay, ears on everybody. Now the test is for two reasons. Number one, we want to test to see that we've actually got something that fits. And number two is that we've got it in the centre. And when I look at my piece of timber here, you can see, I've done this deliberately, I've offset it a tiny little bit. Get the furry stuff away. You can see that I have gone too far to one side. Okay, so I've got too much distance between there and there and there and there. That's for this exercise. If you wish to make an adjustment so that you have a little bit of difference in the way it's fitted, by all means you can get your adjustment or set your adjustment according to the plan that you're working to. So what I have now is my little piece of timber. I just want to test to see what that fits. But this is the second thing, is to make sure that this fits. And as you can see, it fits very, very nicely. And when I turn it up, you can see that it actually fits the same radius on the corner there. Okay, so they're the two reasons why you do this to the test. Now, I want this in the middle. That's the way I've got this, all of these boxes set up. So what I have to do is I have to come this way a tiny little bit. So if I do a test, just do a little, move it a tiny little bit. I can get it spot on just by doing that. And all I've done is just move the fence a tiny little bit. Now what I can do this time is turn it upside down and run it through there. Now, because these are homemade fences, they're not commercially made, the other thing that's very, very important is that your fence is square to your bench. It's extremely important that that happens as well. You do not want this tilted over at an angle. You want that sitting perfectly square. So if you're making your own fences, try and get them so that they are perfectly square. Okay, let's test it again. Ears on. And that's pretty much perfect. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve. when I put my piece of timber in there, you can see I have equal distance on either side. And if you're not happy with it, I would suggest you get your LARK tool and test it. And you can see
Just test it without the timber in it.
I can test it without the timber here, of course. So that's
And then I
perfect
can
there.
just slow that down a
And
bit.
it's spot on there. So yeah, so it's just a matter of getting it perfect every time. And I've got that 2 millimeters in from each side. It's perfect. Okay, so testing's done. Now it's time to set up for now what I have to do is I have to line my mark up. If you want to come in on that one, I'll put my pencil. There it is. There's my mark and my outside edge of my router bit. I'm going to move this way. Need to put a stop on there. Now when I did all of the boxes, I did this once. So all I had to do was set it up one time to do all of the boxes. So I'll move along to my other side. Just make sure you get that pretty close to where you want it. You can always adjust it a tiny little bit. Another stop on this end. Should give it another test. That looks good. Probably needs to go a little bit more that way. That looks pretty close. It's pretty good. Okay, so now it's just a matter of turn that up and cut through there. So what's going to happen is we're going to cut down onto there and cut off here, and then we're going to cut in from here through to there. Don't do this, don't put it in the middle like that and then cut this way and then cut that way, because as soon as you pull that this way, what's going to happen is the router bit's going to pull the piece of work off the fence, and then you'll end up with a squiggly line there. The best way to do it is to sit that up against the fence here. So put it right up hard against the fence there, and you just lower that gently onto there. Now we're only going half the distance, so we're only doing 5 millimeters. We've still got to come up again and do it again, but just drop it down, slide it along, cut and lift. Okay, so ears on, everybody. And so we've come right into the line. You can see I've come right up to the edge of the line there. Get that bit of furry out of the way. So it's come right up to the edge of the line there, and we're right up to the edge of the line on that side as well. Okay, so we're in perfect condition. So now it's just a matter of raising the route a bit. Over there. Need to raise the route a bit. So I'll set the LARK tool at 10mm. This one I've already got set at 10mm. Dust, isn't it? That's 10mm, and the 10mm was just showing on the LARK tool there. So that was the height that we had. The original one was 5mm, the first cut. So now just recut. These on. That technique is the same technique that I would use for the smaller pieces of material, the smaller parts that I use. And now we just be able to fit that in there. You can see that fits in there beautifully. I'll just turn it around so you can see. We've got exactly the same thickness on both sides, so it's really good. And it's just a matter of cutting this to length and then rounding over the end and then gluing that in place. You can make it the tiniest little bit longer if you wish. That way you've got material to take away. So I don't need any of this anymore because I've got my trench cut. I'll just take all the stuff off here.
So Skip was just asking after the model of that clamp called the Duo clamp.
Ah, right.
Yeah, so
the small one's not available, Skip. The little one that I have on the top of the fence. Whereas the big one is.
so this one is available. This Duo
This one's
clamp?
available, yes.
Yeah.
This one's available. This one was a demo model that was given to me years ago.
This little one here.
That little one.
Yeah.
And just show the number on it.
Yep.
And that's not available anymore, as far as I'm aware.
Might be in the US, but we don't know.
Could be in the US, I don't think so.
Oops, sorry. But not in Australia, I don't think.
That's not in Australia, no.
Yeah. Very handy size, isn't it?
Handy size. It's a shame it went off the market. Okay, so where am I up to? Oh, cutting this. Eventually. Here's my mark. And so all I need to do now is just round over that end. So I'm going to go over to the sander. I did that on the sander last time. I'll bring this with me.
Walking backwards and in high heels.
Okay, so that now fits in there.
Okay, let's go over into the light.
Spot on. A little bit of glue. I forgot to tell you the last couple of weeks, folks, we're still running our classes. So if you are of a mind to actually get some private tuition for the use of the jig, I'm happy to accommodate. All of our classes are 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, generally 1-to-1. And you can nominate the time that you want to come and do it, provided that it's a Monday, Tuesday or a Wednesday.
And you can come any time as long as it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
All you need to do is give us a call and I can talk you through what's necessary for the courses. So we'll be running those all year, and if you want to enhance your box making, by all means I could be able to help you a little. Plus the use of the jig, you don't need to supply anything, we supply everything, and Pammy will even feed you. So that could be a good thing. So if you want to do a course, by all means, jump online or jump on an email and send me an email and we can organise a time for you to come and spend your time in this lovely workshop.
In the broom cupboard.
The broom cupboard. There's enough room here for a couple of people. Alright, so I need to set that aside to dry now that I've got it fitted. So it doesn't take a lot to fit it. You just need to go through the processes of adjusting things and making sure things are accurate before you actually start cutting your proper piece. Now, what has to happen with that now is I'm going to plane the top of that off and then give it a light sand, and that will give me a flash top, like you can see on these ones. Now you don't have to use purple heart, you can use white timber if you like. Now in the meantime, while that's drying, what I have to do is I have to put a base in the box. The thing that I've done with the boxes is, I think this one was the first one I did. The thing that I've done with the boxes is I've chamfered the inside edges here. I've chamfered the outside edges there, and I've chamfered all the other edges. What that's done, it's softened the box to start with, and secondly it's got no sharp edges to catch on anything that might be sitting in the cabinet. So things will slide quite nicely. Now, the box that I have here, the framework that I have here, it doesn't have the chamfer on the inside edges. So that's the first thing I need to do, is to take these chamfers off before I actually put it together. Otherwise you can't get at it when it's assembled, because you've only got a small amount of material to work with. And the other thing that I'm going to do is, instead of cutting the trench to the thickness of my piece of material here, which is 8mm, I'm going to cut a rebate in here, so the 4mm there, and the bottom of the framework, or bottom of the base, is actually rebated into it and set down a little bit. So I only want a 4mm rebate on there. So the first thing I have to do is cut a little chamfer on the inside edges. I'll do that before I go too far. The router bit that I'm using for that. Get rid of this box out of the way. I'm only going to do the bottom at this stage, not the tops or the outsides of the box. I could do if I want to, but it's something I like to do afterwards. Now, I haven't got a set measurement for this. This is just the measurement that I have, is just something I have in my head. And that's generally jumbled up with all the other junk that I have in my head, but I can usually get it pretty close. So the way I set the distance is, I run my piece of timber up to the cutting edge. I'm going to come in on that. Mm. This is the cutting edge of the tooth, right? Now, as you lower it, you can see that piece of timber is now getting closer to the bearing as I lower it down. And you can see that there's probably 2mm there. Let's go a little closer. You don't want much off there. Mm. So that's about 1mm. So what it's going to do is it's going to cut a little, actually that's, come down a little bit further. Don't be too prescriptive about this. That should be enough to give me...
You just want a very fine edge taken off, don't you?
So, grab a little piece of scrap and give it a test before you actually do it. So here's on. And when you look at that, it's just taken the edge off. That's all it's done. And that's all we need. Just the tiniest little bit. So it's about 1mm or something, I would say. Now when we cut this, what I don't want to do is I don't want to travel all the way across here. Basically because that's going to be exposed at the bottom of the box and I don't want a rebate there. So all I'm going to do is travel along till I'm level with the end of the dovetails. So when I cut that, I'm just going to line it up and just run that along to the other dovetail so that's on the edge, and just stop there, and I'll probably have to do a little bit of handwork on the end of it. Okay, now first thing I need to do is put up a fence. And this is my fence with again, I'm just going to do another little dance with the camera, or maybe I'm going to turn the table around a bit as well.
That would be good, thank you.
Okay, now to get this to work right, let me turn the table around. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the piece of timber up against the bearing and run my fence up to the piece of timber. That way, when I do this, I can push in against the fence, slide along, pull it off, and I know I've run up against a bearing and I've got my accurate cut. So ears on everybody. I've forgotten something.
You certainly
The
have.
reason I've got that there is because it's got a dust extractor on it. And we should have the dust extractor on it. Here we go. Okay, so that's giving me a little chamfer along the inside edges of all of those, which is really what I'm chasing. The next thing is to build a platform for the base. Now, we cut all of these to the right size last week. So we had to make sure that everything was accurate. I've got to change fences and I've got to change router bits. So the router bit that I'm using this time to cut the trench is my tenon cutter. And so my fence with the tenon cutter, if I can find a going for me. Now, for those of you who are not initiated with our router bits, this is a tenon cutter. Our tenon cutter, it's got a sharp corner on it. The tooth on it is actually raked to 8 degrees, which allows clean cuts across the grain because it's a bit more of a shearing cut. So both our tenon cutter and our panel raising bit, both exactly the same size, so it's 1 1/4, which just happens to be the same size as a Brusso 102 hinge. Let's get this table right. I shifted it off the floor and now it's not right. So they're all designed to cut shearing cuts. Okay. Now, what we need is 4 millimeters of material along the edge here, and the rest of it has to go. So the best way to test that, set the router bit at 4 mil. Set the LARK tool at 4 mil, and you can see I'm going to have to take a reasonable amount off. I'm not going to do the testing on this piece. I'm going to find another piece. This bit here is the same thickness. There will also a number of offcuts that I could use as well. They're the same thickness as this because they were the bits I cut off there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test with a piece of this. Actually, I could probably test with that one. I'll set this at 4mm. I put things down, I forget where I put them. Pencil. Okay, so that's my 4mm. So what I need to do is set the height to there. This is going to be at the top. And my distance for there, let's grab another LARK tool. I'm going to set this at 4.5mm. Now the reason I'm setting it at 4.5mm, when I cut the trench here, the trench is 5mm deep, and I allowed 0.5mm so that I had a bit of freedom in the trench so that we could the bottom could expand and contract. So that's at 4mm, 4.5mm. And I'll set that there. Now remember, this is for test purposes. Lock this in place. Do a test. So ears on, everybody. And so that fits in there pretty perfect. And you can see it's got a little gap at the bottom, which is going to allow it to slide over everything. If you don't want it like that, you can always sort of put it in that way and give yourself a little bit more on the base. I prefer to have it this way. So pretty much I've got it spot on the first go. Take a little bit less off. Now one of the other things I did before we started is I rounded over the corners. I used my radius jig to actually do that. And what I want to do is I want the nicest bit inside. So that's
Have a drink.
okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut along the grain first, across the grain first. And then I'm going to cut along the grain on both sides just to make sure that things fit properly and that I don't get any tear out on the edges. Okay, here's on. when you look at that now, you can see that the cedar is quite furry. So I need to tidy that up just a tiny little bit where it's ripped the edges. So I'm just taking the furry bits off the cut. Okay, now let's see if it fits. So our first thing to do is to assemble the box. And the pieces that I've marked, so a little cross there and a cross there, which means those two bits go together. And then this one goes in here. You only need to mark one corner because you've got dovetails and they'll only ever go in one direction once you get the one marked in the right place. Okay, let's see how we look. So I want that to come across that way. That's pretty nice. This is the beauty of being able to dry assemble. And what I want to do is just make sure that I don't have any gaps on the joints. So that's the first thing that we check, is to make sure there are no gaps here, which means that the piece of timber is actually the right size and it fits in there. Secondly, a small gap around the outside of here, probably needs to come in a little bit more, which allows for movement. And when you look in the box, you can see it's beautifully and clean, beautiful, clean, crisp edges where everything fits together. So that's what we're looking for when we do the box. Right, so we've got the base made, we've got that done. This is dry enough now to go over and we'll just plane the top off that and then we'll glue the box together. Now, we've got 10 minutes to play.
I think you can get that done.
Say again?
I think you can get that done.
I think we can. Now, when you disassemble, support the timber when you pull things apart. So we've got a big piece of material there. Now it's really difficult to sort of try and wriggle that out of there like that, right? So we take a little clamp and just clamp it to the block. Like so. We can actually wriggle that out of place, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. So I've got it almost out on this side. Pull it across to here. And wriggle the other side out. And as you can see, it comes out quite easily. If you've got your joints or your jigs adjusted correctly, you should be able to pull it apart that easy.
And that was a nice little technique you just showed about actually clamping the box to the slab of timber.
Yeah.
On that first corner joint.
Yep.
Because you don't need to do that necessarily with really small boxes.
No.
But
Just with this one here. It's
yeah.
a bit wider.
Yeah.
You can't get your hand spread on it. little easier to do. So what I'm going to do now is just go over, and we're going to go to the vise, and I'm just going to plane this off. Okay, now that sits up too high, right? That's very flexible. What I want to do is I want to make sure that I've got lots of support, and these H&T Gordon vices are excellent for all this sort of thing. So now I can sit that down, and I can support the piece of timber close to where I'm working. And it's just a matter of turn it around the right way so that I'm cutting along the grain. This is just a little block plane that I have. You can use a big smoothing plane if you like. I find this is adequate, does the job. Remember, the timber is exceptionally hard. It's purple heart. This particular purple heart is the African version. The Australian version, Acacia carnii is the botanical name of it. It's extremely hard to get hold of, and you can't get it in big sections. Generally because it's an acacia and it grows very, very slowly in dry lands. Hard to get hold of. I suppose now you're going to ask me the botanical name of the African one, but I can't remember it. Sanding block and a little bit of 150. Okay, and so there we have our little bridge lifter. Now, one of the things that I have to do is I have to round over the inside edge of that. Now, I probably could have done it in the beginning or before I fitted it, but that would have shown a little round over section in here that I don't want it, that would look awful or look ordinary. So I'm going to round it over with a router bit. The router bit that I'm going to use to round it over is a tiny little round over bit that I picked up to use for another task. That's a little, you can see it's not very big. It's just small. We don't sell them, of course. It's just one of those things that we just don't carry. You can pick it up from a hardware store, or if you want to call RB Tool in Victoria. Rock and roll.
See if I can get that clean.
You got it?
Yeah, finally got it. It's really hard to get it to focus.
Okay, so I'm just setting the bottom of the router bit tooth to the bottom edge of the lifter. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it in there and just run along the bearing. Now I don't want to touch the two sides because the tooth will actually touch into the thing there, so I'll just stop a little bit short and I can see where I'm going to stop with it.
This really is fine detail work, isn't it?
Very fine. These little things actually do make your project that little bit nicer when you've got all those tiny little things fixed up and sorted. Lots of people don't know how to do those things because they're a little bit difficult. There's processes that you need to sort of think about. But if you follow simple rules with all your router bits, you'll find that it works quite easily. And that's all I need to do is just take the sharpness off that edge there so that it's just you can't quite see them. I can flat out see it looking at it here, but you might not be able to see it on camera. But all I've done is just taken the little rounded edge off there. Quite easy. See, you can't actually see it on there.
You can see, you can actually just see it there. Just work around to the light. Yeah, it's very subtle.
Yeah, very subtle. Just enough to take the sharpness off the bottom edge of it.
And I think for these boxes, even though they're big chunky things, it's the sum total of all those little touches that soften the box and just give it that sometimes hard to define characteristics of why I like the box. And it's all of those little additions that you make.
Okay, so all I need to do now is glue that together. What have we got? A few minutes. Take a little bit of time to glue together.
Don't worry about that. Have you got time to do the floor, the insert? Because we all know how you glue a box together, right?
Okay.
We've all seen you glue a box together.
Yeah. I'll just assemble this and I'll leave it as it is, and then we'll I want to have a little discussion about some finishing. So I'll spend a couple of minutes with the finishing.
Well, I think probably that's more important, isn't it, than making the false floor, because we've seen you do that before also. Yeah. Yeah, I think the finishing is actually really important.
So that will get glued and assembled. It's actually quite nice like that. It will come up quite nicely. Now, with the finish of these things, we still have to plane the edges off here, or sand them off, or get them off any which way you like. Use a chisel if you wish, but still need to take those edges off there so that we get nice clean joints like this, and then run a little chamfer along the edge just to sort of tidy it up a little bit. Now, all of these boxes that I have over here, what I've done with those is, I'll get a couple of them out, I'll put this one away. What I've done with these is, incidentally, that's the same timber as this, and you can see the difference in the colour variation when you just put a finish on it. It just lifts the colour. These These have all had a couple of coats of Danish wood oil. This one hasn't. It's just bare, and if you look at it, you can actually see that it feels,
yeah, you can hear it.
extremely rough. Whereas this one here, beautiful, it's actually got a sheen to it. It's because it's been done a couple of times. Now to get that sheen back to them, this is how I go about it. I've got myself a platform, so I don't build in my bench any more than I need to. And over here I have this is what we're using, Chinese wood oil. Now if you want to use that same finish, it's made in South Australia and it's organic, so it's food friendly. You can use it on your chopping boards, you can use it on pretty much anything where you have contact with it. And it's a really good all-round finish. Now, I've got a coat of that on here. All I've done is I've decanted a little bit into a jar. 2000 grit sandpaper. Okay, so 2000 grit wet and dry sandpaper is what I'm using. Now, with the grain, all I'm doing is sanding off all the furry bits. Now, if you want to avoid having to do this, and it's not such a bad thing trying to avoid it, if you want to avoid it, what you need to do is before you sand it and put your first coat on, you need to wet the timber down with water and give it a sand while it's wet, and then let it dry, which takes a little bit of time, and put your first coat of finish on. And I won't always guarantee that it's going to not come up furry, but when I feel that now, there is quite a difference. You can actually hear the sound is different when you rub over it. So if I was rubbing over this, you can hear my hand rubbing over the furry bits, whereas nothing. It's just smoothed off. I've taken all the raised grain away from the box, and the whole box will get.
So what did you finish the timber to before you started this process, and you prepared the timber to make the box? What did you sand it down to?
That's a very good question, Pam, because most people don't sand enough, in my opinion. If you talk to some of the pundits around the place and some of the people who do lots of finishing, they'll say, "I sand to 180, sand to 240, sand to 320, and then put a coat of finish on, and then give it another sand afterwards," and all that sort of thing. In my opinion, if you start putting a finish on, this is personally my personal feelings about the thing. If you start putting finishes on when you get to 180 grit sandpaper, 180 is actually scoring and sanding your surface, and those score marks, even though you're working with the grain, will show up. So that's generally not a good idea, particularly when you've got things like this. If you have a look here, you've got grain that runs all the way along here, and then you've got end grain on all your the ends of the other dovetails and the joints. And so if you put a scratch across here, you might not see it on the side grain here, but you will see it on the end of the piece there. So it's important that you actually sand to a finish where you don't have those score marks, scratch marks, or anything else that it's going to stand out when you put a finish on it. So when I do it, I will sand to 800 and sometimes 1200 depending on the timber before I actually put the first coat of finish on. Now, once you get to the finishes, if you're once you've sanded it, your coarse sandpapers, your 120s, your 180s, your 150s and so forth, what they're doing is removing pencil marks, scratch marks, any tooling marks that might occur on your work. Once you start getting past that, you start getting to the sandpapers that actually start removing those scratches that you've put in there with the 120, 150, 180, whatever you're using. 240 will start to take those away. 320 will take away the 240 scratch marks. So each individual one will take away a different scratch marks. Once you get down to 600, you'll find that there's not a lot to remove. You're actually burnishing the timber once you get past 600. So I go to 600, 800, 1200, so I'm burnishing with 3 different grades of sandpaper before I actually get to put a finish on. Now, some people will argue that once you get down to the stage where you're burnishing, all you're doing is folding over the fibres of the timber. But if you've used your 120s, your 150s and your 240s and so forth correctly, you've actually scored or scraped off anything that's likely to stick up anyway. And once you put your first coat of finish on, that's going to show the bits that you haven't taken off, so you'll get raised grain, which is what I've got here. Once I've got it wet. Now, once you get it wet with any type of finish, you're going to end up with that raised grain. So the idea is to let it harden, let it settle, let the finish soak into the timber, and once it's sitting up like it was before, you could hear it when I run my hand over it, you can then get a finer grade paper and just take those bits of furry stuff off and get rid of all of that stuff. So you can go around the whole box. You can actually hear it when I'm doing it. And once it's off, you can't hear it. So that's my my take on finishes. And a lot of people will say, well, geez, you're taking a lot of time. But I tell you what, it's the first thing that everybody sees when they pick up your work is the finish. And if you haven't done it correctly, it's the first thing they pick on. Gosh, you didn't do a very good job of that, was what they'll say to you.
Or they might think it.
Or they might think it. And if you're selling your work,
yeah,
what you want people to do is you pick it up and go, oh, gee, and feel it and smell it and put it under their arm and walk off to the checkout to pay for it. You don't want them to go, not very good, put it down, walk away. So think about that when you're doing your work. And I also hear people say, and this really, really bugs me, about the bottom of the box. You turn the box over and you get the bottom of the work out as well. And the common comment that I hear all the time, anytime you talk about finishes to anybody, the comment I hear, it's only the bottom, nobody sees that. Well, I beg to differ. People do see that, and people use that as a gauge as to your the quality of your craftsmanship. So if you've got the whole thing sanded and feeling exactly the same, then people will think highly of your work. So that's probably a really good indicator of what your work's like, or your quality control is like. So think about your finishing. Make sure you do it right, and it's a very big part of the work. It's the finishing of it that really sometimes brings the box up. You look at the difference between that and something that hasn't got a finish on it at all. You can see I've got pencil marks on it, I've got scribe marks. There's a whole lot of effort that has to go into that box yet to get it up to this sort of standard. So think about that when you're doing your boxes. spend the time with doing your finishing, and you'll always come out on top if you've got it really nicely finished. So I hope that's been helpful to you. I can't think of anything else that I need to say about finishing. It's just take your time with it, choose your finishes. Again, if you don't like this finish, go find one you do.
Yep.
It's a bit of practice. Like sometimes you might buy 4 or 5 different types of finish and you give them a little test and work out which one suits the work that you're doing. Some timbers accept this type of finish better than others. Some you'll find that having a variety of finishes in your cupboard will probably give you at least choices with your work. I'm not a big fan of shiny, so the flat stuff's fine.
So how many coats of the Chinese wood oil will you put on each box?
These boxes will get probably, that's had 1 coat now. I'll put another coat on. I'll let that sit, so I'll give it 2 coats. I'll have a look at it, see if it's raised any more grain. If it needs another coat, I'll give it another coat. Apart from that, it'll get a coat of wax. The wax I use will be the CONSTANTIA wax as well, and that will be applied afterwards. So generally that's what I do with all the boxes anyway, the technique I use. So you don't need a lot of finish, depending on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to get something that's got really a lot of depth in it, you probably need to use a polyurethane or something like that. It's going to give you a shine or a semi-shine with a lot of depth in the finish. You're building on the finishes. But for something like this, 2 coats of that and a wax should be adequate. So
excellent.
All right, folks, that's about it for today. I'm going to finish up this.
And this is the end of the project.
That's the end of this project. So next project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay homage to one of Roger Gifkins' little boxes. It's something that I'm asked about very regularly, so keep your ears open for that one. It will be we'll be starting that next week. So it's one of Roger Gifkins' boxes that he made real early in the piece. But when we talked about it, you know what I'm like. I cannot do somebody else's work exactly the same way they do. I have to tinker with it. So I'm going to tinker with this, but it will be a similar vein to what Roger's actually got done. So anyway, so that will be it for today. So have a good week, everybody, and as usual, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. People have been ringing me and asking me where they can find various things on our website or about different processes. All the stuff's on there. All you need to do is subscribe. It's a free transaction, so subscribe and go to live, and you can get all of our videos in date order, and each of the projects is color coded, so you're easy to see, easy to get to, and you can join us on Sunday mornings. So have a good week, everybody, and I'll see you all next week.